Between 1968 and 1985, a brutal murderer stalked the hills around Florence, picking off couples in parked cars. He became known as the Monster of Florence, and to this day, his identity is still a complete mystery. Imagine the rolling hills of Tuscany, surrounding the historic city of Florence, Italy. It's the late 1960s, a time of social change and newfound freedom. Young couples, looking for a bit of privacy, would often drive their cars into the beautiful, secluded countryside for a romantic evening. These quiet, winding roads and lovers' lanes were seen as peaceful escapes, but that sense of peace was about to be shattered. In August 1968, near the small town of Signa, the bodies of Barbara Loschi and Antonio Lobianco were found in their car. They had been shot multiple times. Initially, the police suspected a crime of passion, arresting Loschi's husband, Stefan Emil. He even confessed, but it soon became clear that this was just the beginning. The local community was shocked, but they believed the case was closed. They had no idea that this was the first act in a reign of terror that would last for nearly 2 decades. 6 years later, the killings began again, and a horrifying pattern emerged. The killer, armed with a .22 caliber Beretta pistol, would target young couples in parked cars, usually on nights with little or no moonlight. His attacks were methodical and shockingly brutal. He would ambush his victims, firing through the car windows with deadly precision. After the initial murders, the killer's acts became even more grotesque, involving a knife and the ritualistic mutilation of the female victims. This macabre signature proved that these were not random acts of violence, but the work of a single, highly organized predator. Over 17 years, the Monster of Florence is officially linked to 7 double homicides, claiming a total of 14 lives, though some investigators believe the true number could be 16 or even higher. He would strike, then vanish into the darkness without a trace. The remote locations of the crimes meant there were rarely, if ever, any eyewitnesses. The forensic technology of the time was incredibly limited. DNA profiling was still years away, and crime scenes were often contaminated before investigators could properly secure them. The killer's ability to evade capture for so long created a pervasive atmosphere of fear that gripped the entire region. The media frenzy was intense, and every new murder sent waves of panic through Florence and the surrounding towns. Couples stopped going on their evening drives. Tourists became wary of the idyllic countryside. The lovers' lanes that were once symbols of romance became places of dread. The police were under immense pressure, but they had very few leads. The monster seemed to be a ghost, a phantom who could kill with impunity, and then simply disappear, leaving behind a trail of terror. Shell casings from the same Beretta, and a community living in constant fear. The psychological impact was enormous. It felt like a collective nightmare that Florence couldn't wake up from. The investigation into the Monster of Florence was one of the longest and most complex in Italian history, and it was filled with dead ends, false accusations, and bizarre twists. Over the years, more than 100,000 men were investigated. The police were desperate for a breakthrough, which led them down several questionable paths. One of the most famous and controversial groups of suspects became known as the Sardinian Clan, a circle of acquaintances connected to the first victim's husband, Stefan Emil. For a while, the police were convinced they were responsible. However, after another double murder occurred while the main Sardinian suspects were in prison, that theory fell apart. The investigation then shifted focus, eventually zeroing in on a group of friends from the Tuscan countryside, often called the compagni di merende, or snacking buddies. At the center of this theory was a poor farmer named Pietro Pazziani. He was an aggressive man with a violent past, and he was convicted in 1994, only to be acquitted on appeal. He was set to be retried, but died of a heart attack in 1998 before the trial could begin. His alleged accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Latti, were convicted, but many believe they were merely small-time criminals, not the masterminds behind such calculated crimes. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some believed the killer was a doctor or a surgeon because of the precise mutilations. Others whispered about a satanic cult or a shadowy, elite group paying someone to commit the murders and procure the human trophies. The DNA evidence, when it was finally able to be tested, was inconclusive. Saliva found on anonymous letters sent to prosecutors didn't match any of the main suspects. The case became a tangled web of accusations, questionable confessions, and a deep-seated feeling that the authorities had either made critical errors or were perhaps even involved in a couple. The truth seemed to slip further and further away with each new lead. So why, after all this time, does the case of the monster of Florence remain unsolved? There are several compelling reasons. The most obvious is the lack of conclusive physical evidence. The .22 Beretta pistol, the single most important piece of evidence that linked all the crimes, was never found. The DNA available is minimal and hasn't led to a definitive match. Without the murder weapon or a clear DNA profile, connecting any suspect to all the crimes is nearly impossible. Furthermore, the very nature of the investigation has been criticized. Some believe the focus on Paziani and his snacking buddies was a distraction, a way to close the case on a group of easy targets, while the real killer, possibly someone more intelligent and influential, was overlooked. The possibility of multiple killers or copycat crimes also complicates the timeline. Was it truly one person for 17 years? Or did someone else pick up the mantle after the initial murders? This case has left an indelible scar on Italian culture. It's the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even a blockbuster movie. The term Monster of Florence has become synonymous with the ultimate unsolved mystery, a modern boogeyman story rooted in horrifying reality. As forensic science advances, there's always a glimmer of hope. New techniques in DNA analysis could one day re-examine the tiny bits of evidence and finally give a name to the phantom who terrorized Tuscany for so long. The monster of Florence may never be officially identified. The terror he caused has faded, but the fear, the unanswered questions, and the chilling mystery remain. The dark legacy of his crimes continues to haunt the beautiful hills of Florence. What do you think? Was there one killer, or more? Was it a conspiracy, or did the police simply chase the wrong leads? Drop your theory in the comments, and if you want more chilling unsolved crimes, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.